Attorney Jonathan Elson, reminding you that if you've been injured in an auto accident, it's important to have somebody on your side. When you need a lawyer,
then you need Nelson.
Liebig, who was 46 at the time of her death, was reportedly stabbed 46 times and received 16 fractures in her skull by a hammer. At the time of the murder, both Wilson and Saldivar were 17 years old. They said that they were tired of their mother's complaints of being sick from cancer and asking them to help around the house. Liebig was asleep on the sofa when the attack occurred, and she called for help from her children because she believed she was being attacked by an intruder. Her last words, according to police, were, "Is this really happening?" Wilson had been living at the Liebig home for a number of years. He was considered an adopted son. Saldivar is Liebig's biological son. In court, witnesses testified that Wilson had a very difficult childhood filled with both physical and sexual abuse from his father and others.
Throughout his life, he has been dealt in absolutely terrible hands, starting with his father. At the age of 3 or 4, Mr. Wilson began being physically abused by his father. And by the age of 5, that physical abuse turned into sexual abuse. From the ages of 5 to 7, Mr. Wilson was sexually abused by his father.
He had been described as suicidal at one time. Wilson went from house to house after the death of his mother and grandmother when he was 10 years old and lived alone for 2 months at age 11 when his grandfather kicked him out of the house. In court today, Wilson cried when they spoke of the death of his mother and grandmother, the only 2 nurturing figures in his life. The court commented that he exhibited remorse and understands what he did was wrong. He had led police to where they buried Liebig and where the murder weapons were located. It was Saldivar who reportedly came up with the plan to kill their mother, and Wilson reluctantly followed but led the attack. A letter written by family friend Richard and Stormy Ingersoll said that Wilson craved acceptance and was a follower. His attorney, Ronnie Boscovich, said Wilson is currently in therapy. Kirk Vitto, Chief Deputy District Attorney for Nye County, said the crime was premeditated and asked for the maximum sentence for use of a deadly weapon with enhancements and for the charge of second-degree murder.
This was clearly a premeditated first-degree murder charge, potentially facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. Our negotiation and actions by the legislature, as well as court cases that I know this court is very familiar with, have intervened to address situations when a young man such as Mr. Wilson is involved with a case like this. Having said that, it's the position of the prosecution that the defendant has gotten the only break he should ever get. The United States Supreme Court, the Nevada Supreme Court, the Nevada legislature changed the law in his favor, making it so that he's eligible for probation after 20 years. He cannot be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which was the impetus for stepping off of the first-degree murder charge and making the offer we did that was accepted. I know counsel has stated that Mr. Wilson was not the instigator, but it's very clear that they were watching, they were waiting for the victim to go to sleep, checking on her, and that it was actually Mr. Wilson who attacked first, stabbing the victim in the neck with a knife, and when that didn't work, then we have the rest of this offense.
Wilson pled guilty to the murder, and Judge Wonker sentenced him to the maximum sentence allowed by law, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. For the assault with a deadly weapon charge with enhancement, Wilson has been sentenced to 8 to 20 years with 771 days of credit for time served. Michael Liebig, Dawn Liebig's son, wrote a letter to the court. He asked for a sentence outside of what the law allows due to the heinous nature of the crime, stating that after his mother was beaten, she barely had a head left. Details of the crime revealed a very graphic scene. Prior to this crime, there had been no criminal history or reports from school or any other authority stating previous issues with Michael Wilson. Dakota Saldivar was also to be sentenced today, but that was postponed for submission of needed paperwork by the court. His court date will be rescheduled.